Welcome everybody to Sustainable River Basin Management Module 3.1, Part 1. Let's first have a look at what we have been doing so far and where we are. We have completed Module 1, 2, and we are now starting Module 3 on statuses and challenges in sustainable river basin management, and we will spend 2 weeks on this module. Now, let's look at the major water challenges, and the sustainable river basin management has to be able to respond to those. First of all, water pollution, water governance, poverty, climate change, but also the global water cycle, the globalization, including the virtual water trade, the role of corporations in water sustainability, demography and urbanization, technologies, and the monitoring data and information in general. Now, the topics of our first week of Module 3 are the following, dealing with these water challenges. And specifically, we will be looking at water and society, and under this topic, we will talk about water scarcity and social security, urbanization and demography, poverty and gender, and water governance. Today we will start with water scarcity and social security. Let's first try to find a definition for water scarcity. Water scarcity is broadly understood as the lack of access to adequate quantities of water for human and environmental uses. You see that with water scarcity at this level of definition, we only look at quantities and do not include quality, although this becomes also an important component of the water scarcity. It is increasingly being recognized as a serious and also growing concern in many countries. What we can say is that all of our continents, and more than 50% of our population on our planet are affected by water scarcity at this moment in time already. Now, let's look at the water resources distribution which come along with the water scarcity, and from a natural perspective, the hydrological perspective. We know that water is unevenly distributed and it's also subject to extreme fluctuations, and this is simply due to climate variability. We are not accounting for climate change in this, as you remember. The physical symptoms of water stress occur, however, not only in water-scarce countries, but increasingly and more in water-wealthy countries too. And these hydrological impacts and the climate variability come along with a high uncertainty for planning of water infrastructures, planning of water supply, and this also is attributed to the lack of data, the lack of archives, or the non-functioning of archives, long-ranging archives and monitoring systems for hydrological data collection. Now, let's look at this in a little bit more detail, what this also means when we take source water distribution here. And the term source water, we will come back in detail later, but source water applies to the headwaters, the areas where rainfall has been transformed into runoff and feeds our groundwater and our river systems. When we look at this interesting map here, which was produced based on our FAO hydrological and climate database in 2007, we can see which of the countries depend on waters which are generated outside their country borders. And if you just take India, for the sake of interest, maybe from your side, as an example here, then we see that about between 20 and 50% of the source waters of India are generated outside India's country borders. And this shows us already a component that leads us to the aspects of water security, water conflicts, and also cooperation in water conflict resolution. Let's follow up on this water as a security issue. And a good source as an entry point is this report here, Earth Security Index, which has been produced on an annual basis, and I've just picked the last year and this year. This year's reports, you should try to get hold of these reports and use it as an entry source to get additional literature on water and security. Now, what this brings together in this diagram are several aspects: water, the food component, crops, which is food security, the climate aspects, land, population, fiscal aspects, governance issues, and energy. And then we see on a scale of 0 to 100% the different components which should be indicative for these larger fields and in which range we are. So the larger that is, the more serious the security issue is. And what we can see in this diagram of 2014 is that there are two sticking out. One is the energy component, energy scarcity in this case, and the second is water. Water, especially the demand pressure, are very high in this diagram. Now, I just took the most recent report of 2015 and was trying to compare this situation. What we can see, however, is that comparison is not straightforward, which is unfortunate, but often the case, and we should pay attention to this. There are different subgroups to our major subjects. We still find our major subjects like water here. We have the fiscal still here, food and population, but the arrangement is different, and then we have different subcategories to it. In the case of water, those have not changed. We still have water scarcity, but we also see that water pollution have become a major, have increased substantially and become a major concern of security. And what we also see on the energy part, that the carbon intensity has increased a lot, whereas the domestic supply seems to have slightly improved, probably at the cost of the carbon intensity. So this can give us some guiding orientation, but as you see, this may not be comparable across the years, and for that reason also difficult to compare across countries. Now let's look into the challenges in water scarcity or water availability, water resource distribution that actually are human-made or man-made. The scarcity and the disparity of the water resources have increased as the usability have changed, and this because the distance to sources have increased. Those easily available water resources have been tapped, so we have to fetch water from more distant sources. We have to go for deeper wells, for instance, and this attached to this there are costs on operational but also on capital costs, which limit the usability. And the other component is water quality. The water quality has decreased or deteriorated substantially, and which limits the usability of the water that we have available right now. And then there are additional components which are environmentally sustainable usabilities, which limit what we should be using as a water source. And the fourth of this, the political priorities, which define water allocation, also define the usability or change the level of usability. Now, we will investigate that man-made water scarcity a little bit more. We can differentiate it in various ways, and I have chosen this one, which, from my point of view, highlights the best where the actual issues are. First is the competition for access, and that competition increases as the scarcity of the resource increases, and this takes place at all levels. It starts from the lowest community household level and goes up to national and regional levels. Each of the states will try to achieve water security, and this may drive drought, and this may induce migration in the region, and it may cause regional large-scale starving of population. Then there's a second category, which is, I would call, a colonial heritage or colonial disputes. Those have to deal with the country borders, which were divided under the colonial times, which divide traditionally commonly used resources like water, but also forests, for instance, or grassland, pasture land, and, for instance, the colonial laws which emphasize the resource abstraction as examples. The third of these man-made scarcities have to do with the fact that water security and access to fresh water have reached the top ranks of political agendas. It's not often said to be the case, but very often it is the hidden agenda that actually deals with has the water as its major subject. And this is that water security has been increasingly perceived as a part of a struggle for empowerment, or empowerment in the form of democratic empowerment of regions or of countries. And very often, as a fourth man-made factor, we see competitive exclusion, or we also can say resource capture, which creates disadvantaged communities in favor of, for instance, wealthy economic sectors. This could be an export factor, an important part of the economy, mining or tourism or some specific crop production, whatever it is, which puts certain parts of the society, of the communities, into a very restricted condition in terms of access to water or other resources like land. Now, let's zoom out of this and look at the world economy in the context of water scarcity. Now, we can do that by simplifying the data need to compare one country with the other, or do comparison at a global scale. And we can look at people by taking water availability per capita and per country. We can also take the economical potentials in the form of the GDP, gross domestic product, and we can take in food security in the form of, if we remember that agriculture takes up about 70% of the water in water availability, that crop production is a major water consumer. Now, there's an interesting figure to that, which shows us the percent of population by water stress level here. And what we see here is a green, yellow to red scale, from green below 20% water stress level to above 40% red water stress level. And what we can see is that less than half of our population is in countries or in parts of the world where the stress levels, water stress levels, are below 50%. And the majority of our human population is living in parts where water stress levels are medium to severe. And now when we take this information in terms of people to a measure of the GDP, the production, the monetary flows, then we see that just below 60% would be of our GDP is being produced in regions where the water stress levels are below 20%, and 20% is still quite high as a water stress level. So still that green is maybe misleading here. And then we see that about 40% of the GDP at global scale are produced in water-stressed regions. And this is quite alarming. This is our current situation, and the situation will not improve. Now, what stress index, the water stress index or water stress level means here is the ratio of the water withdrawal to hydrological availability in this case. Now, let's try to think to see which ways we can use to assess water scarcity. What are common methods to assess water scarcity? Unfortunately, I can't present you a unique instrument, not even a unified terminology on water scarcity, but I will present you the most commonly used methods and measures, which are the Falkenmark indicator, the water scarcity index, the physical and economic water scarcity index, the water poverty index, and the basic human needs index. You will find others, and you may in your research or in your professional lives come into a situation where you have to build your own index to be able to express and transmit the information that you want to highlight. Now let's look into the Falkenmark indicator first. It defines water scarcity in terms of the total water resources available to the population of a region. And this is, so to say, demand-based. It has restrictions, as you can see. It only looks into the renewable surface and groundwater flows of a country. It neglects water shortages in dry seasons or in certain regions within a country. And that is because it only looks at water availability per person on average. And it does not account for water quality, and it does also not account for the express country's ability to use the resources in a specific, better way, in an efficient way also. Now, the Falkenmark indicator shows us that a country may have sufficient water, whereas we know that the country has actually severe water problems because of pollution or because the water is not being developed or is not accessible in the state where it is. Let's think of groundwater, extended groundwater aquifers, for instance. Now, the Falkenmark indicator splits the information into these categories. Water vulnerability, it shows us that it does not express it as things are simply good. It still considers the situation as vulnerable, which is an amount of renewable water in a country below 2,500 cubic meter per person per year. It then the next group is water stress, called water stress. The third group is water scarcity, and the extreme case is absolute water scarcity, which means there's an amount below 500 cubic meters per person per year in that country available. Now, let's look into a map that, a global map that shows us this Falkenmark indicator. This is, was produced in 2008, and it shows us here the scale of the Falkenmark indicator in cubic meter per person. The red or orange is scarce or absolute water scarcity, and then it moves up to the vulnerable part about here. And what we see is at country level, where are the countries with severe water scarcity, and where are the vulnerable countries which need to pay attention to the water usages but are not driven to the edge of the situation. Now, let's take this Falkenmark indicator in a different way and to project situations. This is the situation in 1995, and this is the projection for the year 2025, which is not so far ahead, means in 10 years' time. And we can see the changes that are projected for this, for water scarcity in not only countries, but in this case the river basins, which help us to differentiate what within countries and to relate it to certain river basins like the Indus River Basin or the Nile River Basin and so on. What we can see from this only is that there's a wide variability within countries occurring. And this we should not forget when we talk about these water scarcities. Scaling it up to a regional or a country level very much loses the sharpness of the information and may make a country look better or worse than what you see or you know from your own catchment where you come from. Now, the second index that I want to present to you is the water scarcity index. Very often it's also expressed as water stress index. Although, as I say, the terminology is not uniform, so don't get confused. You always have to check what was the method used to know what index you are using. This is the ratio of total annual withdrawals to available water resources. And the classifications are at country level that there's no water scarcity if the withdrawals are below the 10% of annual supply. Then a country has low water scarcity when there's an annual withdrawal between 10 and 20% of the annual supply, and that a country is water scarce or severely water scarce with withdrawals between 20 and 40% of the annual supply, or exceeding the 40% of the annual supply. Now, this can be, this has been developed by various teams, and you can get literature on that. What this method excludes and cannot consider is the capacity of a country to adapt to lower water availabilities, and there are techniques in each of region, which is by its very climate a part which has a lower water availability by using certain technologies, could be latest or new technologies, or by changing the water use behavior. And it does not consider the transboundary nature of water resources. It also does not, as such, consider man-made increases in water supply, which, for instance, could come from non-conventional water sources, and it doesn't include the water withdrawals out of the recycled or reused water, although this can be incorporated, and the method has been demonstrated, for instance, by this team of researchers. Now let's look at the water scarcity index in a map. And again, we have a possibility to compare this between the change. We can look back to the year 1995 and can see at the projections for that. You can see that the changes between the Falkenmark index and the water scarcity index here. You see that there are several countries which, according to this, have a low water scarcity or are not water scarce. Dark blue is not water scarce or have a low water scarcity, although we know that the situation has changed dramatically in those countries. And we see that some of these countries which use a lot of non-conventional water sources today are here classified as highly water scarce or severely water scarce countries. The projections follow a little bit what we would expect also from the economic growth pattern of these regions, where the situation in all of the cases are deteriorating substantially, driving those countries, for instance India, into severely water scarce countries. But you also see this for some of the African countries here, where you would not expect it in the first place. Now we will continue on this subject in our next class, and I see you again.